Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Dickinson. I'm your history teacher for this morning again. And the course we're doing at the moment is on the Cold War. And I'm a history teacher. I've been teaching 26 years now, and I'm in West Sussex. And the lesson that we're going to do today is going to be on the Berlin Blockade and Berlin Airlift, a very important event in the start of the Cold War, which happened in the late 1940s or 48, 49, and quite often comes up in exams as well. And it's important to know exactly where this actually took place and why and what actually happened. So what we're going to go through, good morning Luke, what we're going to go through with this today is the events of the actual blockade, why it happened, what actually happened during it, and how it finished. So I'm going to share my screen with you, which is a PowerPoint, which I'm going to just go through with you. Hopefully it gives some ideas about what actually happened for the 20 minutes that we're going to be together. Okay. Right, okay, you should hopefully be seeing, oh no, please don't do that. Just want to point out how Berlin, not Berlin, but Germany looked at the end of the Second World War. Here we have, it was divided into 4 sections, and on the right-hand side is the Russian side, or the communist side, and Berlin, as you can see, right in the middle of the Russian side, which was a bit of a problem, okay, because half of Berlin was also divided as well. So one thing that you want to make sure is the Russians took very high casualties in the capture of Berlin in May 45. They spent the entire early occupation trying to take over all the zones in the city, but were stopped by German Democrats such as Willy Brandt and Comrade Adenauer. Reluctantly, the Russians had to admit the Americans, French and British, to their respective zones. So Berlin was also divided. So not only, this is Berlin, so not only was Germany divided, but Berlin was as well. So you had a Russian side on one side and the Western on the other as well. And that was divided between the Americans, French and the British. So, and that was, don't forget, that's in the communist part of it, which is really strange to get your head around, the fact that inside the Soviet part of Germany, Berlin was also divided. So that half of the left-hand side of the page there, the left-hand half of Berlin was Western, it was capitalist. And the right-hand side, the Russian side, was not, it was communist. There was not a wall between them at this time, okay? Just want to point this out, there was not a wall. So the wall came later. A lot of students get a bit confused about this. They're thinking the wall was there, as you can see, a barrier, it started at the beginning. It was not. Okay, now, one thing that you want to be remindful of, Stalin wanted to destroy Germany. He wanted Germany to be completely weak so that they could not attack and invade the Soviet Union again. Britain and America wanted to rebuild Germany. They thought that if it wasn't, if it was weak, it wouldn't be able to develop, and it was a breeding ground for communism. If it was weak, so they wanted to build it up, and they realised that the mistakes they made in the First World War was to punish Germany too much. Okay, in 1947, the US president, a new US president called Harry Truman, gave a speech in which he promised that the USA would give aid to countries that was resisting communist takeovers. This became known as the Truman Doctrine, very important key term here for your exams, the Truman Doctrine, that the USA would help countries who were resisting communist takeovers. Okay, doesn't mean that they would start wars with them or anything like that, but they would help them, give aid, give money, and it doesn't necessarily give money, they might give military aid as well. In June the same year, a man called George Marshall, the US Secretary of State, gave a speech outlining ways to help keep communists at bay and build up markets for US exports. This became known as the Marshall Plan, another key term that you need in your when you're doing your GCSE exams. The Marshall Plan was about giving money, basically. It was about giving money. Now, doesn't mean that they just gave money willy-nilly and just gave it out to countries to do what you like with it. It was about giving money to European countries, mostly European countries, that they spend it on American goods or with American companies and things like that. So it was building up the American economy as well, but also and the fact that they would have elections and things like that. So they're not going to be going down the communist route. So it wasn't necessarily offered out to the communists. $13 billion was provided by the US government for all European countries to rebuild. So Europe was rebuilt, and Britain got some of this as well. $13 billion was a lot of money back in 1945. And the USA decided they needed to prevent the Soviet Union from spreading communism. So they needed to what's called contain it. It was about keeping the Soviet Union where it was, not trying to stop it, trying to prevent it from spreading. They thought that the idea that behind the Soviet Union and communism was that it would spread, that they wanted to spread. And so they wanted to contain it. And so, therefore, 3 terms that you really should try and take away from this little bit here. Containment, the idea of containing the Soviet Union where it was, Truman Doctrine, resisting communist takeovers, and the Marshall Plan was giving the money. So there's 3 aspects of how America's foreign policy about keeping Soviet Union where it was. Really, really crucial you understand this bit here. And this is a very famous cartoon that came out at the time. This comes up quite a lot on exams. Here you can see Uncle Sam there and his American hat and striped trousers, and he's got there Western aid, and you can see that Western Europe is there as a building that's falling down, being propped up by American money again, and you can see that come on Sam, it's up to us again. This idea that America yet again is coming to the rescue of Europe and propping it up. Wasn't for America. This was an American cartoon, obviously. So now, what caused attention in Berlin, especially about what we're talking about today? The Russians were taking German industry back to Russia. They were stripping German industry. Britain and the USA joined 2 zones to get it back on its feet. They called the 2 zones Bizonia, 2 zones. And this might worry Stalin, because he's thinking, hang on, they're getting stronger, and also they're building it up as well, rather than destroying Germany, which he wanted to do. Okay, and they introduced a new currency. This really did upset Stalin. He introduced a new currency in West Germany, or they introduced it, sorry, this is the Western side, they call it a Deutschmark, okay, and they didn't tell Stalin they were going to do this. And of course, this is a indication that they're going to stay, that and especially was going to stay, that it's going to have a new currency. And also, with the introduction of new currency, he was a step too far. Stalin saw this as a bit of a threat, really, and he saw that West Berlin was a window into the West for those living in the Soviet sector. So people could literally see across the street and across the other side of the road how the West was living, and you could cross over and come back. You had to show your passports and things like that, but you could do it. Lots of people were. West Berlin was a potential embarrassment to Stalin. With martial aid, it was being used, he said, as a showpiece of capitalism. Look how wonderful capitalism is. People will go better jobs, have better pay, better living standards. This, together with his determination to prevent West German state, meant Stalin had to do something. Okay, so what did he do? What did he do? Stalin thus wanted to force the Western allies, USA, Britain, France, out of West Berlin. He wanted them to leave. So in June 1948, Stalin blocked all routes in and out of Berlin, road, rail, routes were all cut off, all surface links, transport links were also cut. Sorry, so I close my door properly. So he wanted to make sure that people could not leave or could not get into West Berlin, cut off all the routes into West Berlin. The choice then, what could they do? What could the Allies do? The choice to fly supplies in was taken. This meant the Western Allies would give in, wouldn't give in to Stalin, but also wouldn't provoke war. Okay, it placed pressure back on Stalin. He couldn't just shoot the planes down. If he did, it would be an open act of war. So they actually decided to fly planes in on a regular basis, not just regular. I mean, you know, as you can see, these are very famous picture at the top. They're very famous children there watching the planes fly in. Okay, very famous cartoon that was put out at the time, a British cartoon from 1948. Stalin watches as a Storks being a symbol of bringing good things, usually babies. Stalin watches Storks fly coal and food into Berlin, but he doesn't dare shoot them down because it'll be seen as a bad thing. So how often do they do this? For 11 months, food and other supplies were flown into Berlin by the British, French and US planes. Okay, inhabitants of West Berlin depended on these flights for everything. In the winter of '48, they lived on dried potatoes, powdered eggs. Yeah, you can actually get powdered eggs, believe it or not, and cans of meat, with just 4 hours of electricity per day. There was a shortage of coal because they needed coal back then to heat and run things. They rationed how much electricity you could have, only 4 hours of electricity per day. 275,000 flights carried 1.5 million tons of supplies. At its peak, one plane landed every 3 minutes. So this was an operation. The airlift cost over $100 million, together with the lives of 79 servicemen who died in accidents. Some of the planes did crash. Some of it was quite often in the winter. The German or Soviet planes wouldn't shoot them down, but sometimes they would fly alongside them and try to put them off. And unfortunately, some planes did crash. And so 79 men lost their lives. But most of the other ones were seen as heroes of delivering. It went on for 318 days. So almost a year. It went on for 11 months to make, to supply. And of course, what happened at the end of it? They obviously gave it in. This is a cartoon. I was just going to say, how popular was this? You think this would be really, really, really popular, wouldn't you? That they're helping out Russia. Sorry, helping out the West. This is an American cartoon, Western interpretation of the Marshall Plan. I love the guy, but sometimes I think he's too good. The idea that America giving too much money, helping the West too much. One thing that you've got to remember about the West, about America especially, American foreign policy has swayed between being involved in everything, being involved in around the world and helping the world, if you can call it help, or not, and being very isolationist. So it's gone between the two. So a classic example was after the First World War, when Woodrow Wilson wanted to be involved in what's called the League of Nations and help out. When he lost election in 1920, the Americans then had an isolationist perspective and they said, we're not going to join it. After the Second World War, they got involved in everything around the world and they wanted to help out around the world, mainly to help themselves as well. But a lot of people still were seeing it, hang on a minute, you're helping the rest of the world, not us. And as you see, that cartoon there is the US taxpayer. Is that woman represents the taxpayer. It's American tax dollars that are being spent around the world, maybe not us, and not in Britain, not in America. And you see this with even Trump today. He's more of an isolationist. He should look after America first. So some of the facts about the airlift. In the winter, Berliners lived on dry potatoes, powdered eggs, electricity for 4 days. A plane landed every 3 minutes. On 16th of April, 1949, 1,400 flights brought in 13,000 tons of supplies in just 1 day. Berlin only needed 6,000 tons a day to survive. So they made sure that the Western Berliners didn't starve, and carried on. Consequences of this. Now, what are the consequences? This is really crucial when you come to doing your exams, because with your exams, you get what's the cause of it. And this was about the fact that Berlin's in the east, and Berlin was divided, and they introduced a new currency. That's really, really crucial. The new currency. You can't also you must remember about the Marshall Plan, containment, Truman Doctrine. Okay, that's a cause of it. Then what happened? You've got to look at what happened, and then you've got to look at the consequences. What happened at the end of the Berlin airlift? By May 1949, Stalin reopened supply routes. This was seen as a massive defeat for Stalin, okay? Because he tried something, didn't work. USA joined NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, NATO is a military organization, mainly centered around Europe, the joining of European countries in a military organization to defend themselves. The Soviet Union had their own version of it, called the Warsaw Pact, but America joined it, so therefore it became quite a leading figure of it. Okay, it was committed to keeping peace. That's the idea behind the NATO, or so they said anyway. And the USSR announced that it had tested its first nuclear bomb. So as a consequence of this, the Cold War kind of really stayed. It intensified to a certain extent. This division between the two really did carry on and intensify quite a lot. This was a flashpoint. So one thing you're going to take away from this, gentlemen and ladies, me enjoying this, is that the Berlin airlift, Berlin Blockade and Berlin airlift intensified and made the Berlin a centre of the Cold War, and it remained a centre of the Cold War right until the end of the Cold War in about 1990. So it really is at the beginning of, it's 1948-49, don't forget, this is at the beginning of the Cold War, and it really is ramping up in this division between East and West, and Stalin realised that the West aren't going to leave Berlin, and the division in Berlin, which was in the eastern side, was going to remain, and it was but they hadn't built a wall. Please, please, please make sure you understand that. It had not built a wall. It was a division. There was a barrier, but you could swap between the two. Okay, and people did, and they still went back. But some people went over to the West and stayed permanently, and it was a bit of an embarrassment it was a bit of an embarrassment for hello Cody. It was a bit of an embarrassment for the West, for Soviet Union. I'm afraid. Sorry, the West really didn't. The Russians really hated the fact that the Americans and the British stayed there. They really didn't like it at all. If you want to do a little bit more about this and not just listen to me, what you could do is to, if I can just find it. If you go on to YouTube, on YouTube there are, I can't find it now. If you go onto YouTube, there are videos. Just type in Berlin Blockade, and there's about a second one down. There's quite a few that you can look at as well, and it's quite easy. It's quite a good little topic. There's about a 10-minute video on YouTube, a little black and white one which you can watch, and it's really the cartoony ones are a bit rubbish. But it's quite good. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. It's, I say, only 20 minutes long. There's loads more to do about this, but please take away what caused it, okay, the containment, Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan and the new currency, what actually happened, flying planes in, the resources, coal, food and things like that into there for almost a year, 318 days. How often it was happened, about every 3 minutes, every day, and the consequences. It intensified the Cold War. It didn't help it, it made it worse. And Russia decided that they need to look after themselves. The Western allies weren't going to hang around anymore. We're going to hang around, so they weren't going to go away, and they needed to look after themselves. And the West weren't going to. For the West, they weren't going to give it up. The next lesson, which I think is going to be on Thursday this week, I think we're going to go over doing this chronologically, and I think the next one's going to be on the Hungarian uprising, which is another quite interesting topic. Hope you've enjoyed it, gentlemen, and I hope it wasn't too rushed for you. Normally this lasts about an hour. I do this in schools for about an hour, and we do a little bit more than this, so I hope it's been okay. Nice to see you. I hope the sun's shining where you are, and you enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good day, gentlemen, and I'll see you again soon, hopefully. Good morning. Goodbye.